a really good segment, and we're going to go from one damn good segment to another damn good segment. We're joined with the man himself, Daniel Lazare. Daniel Lazare is an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, America's Undeclared War, and thank you for the update on this. You can follow Daniel on X at DH find his columns on permanentrevolution.org, Democratic Constitution blog at Substack. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing good. I love that permanent revolution. Permanent revolution. Is that even possible? I know that this is not what I put you on, but this is, I guess, somewhat of a philosophical question.
A permanent revolution is a phrase that it goes back to Marx and Engels. It's the idea that the only democratic force in the world today is the working class, and only the working class can sort of carry through the democratic reforms that are necessary, which themselves then are part of the transition to socialism. So it's an attempt to people tend to separate democracy and socialism, but the argument is really the same. It's the same struggle. The socialist struggle should be democratic, and the democratic struggle, in order to succeed, should be socialist. And that actually affects a lot of, that has many practical implications, involving colonial policy, gender policy, racial policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Fascinating. There was always this belief, is there this end of history government that is perfect, that can just float above it all, that we've reached this pinnacle of and maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is just no. Reality doesn't really care about your wants, right? That you need a government to be able to respond to real world environmental phenomena, and environment changes, and your government needs to be able to accommodate the changes.
The political structures that arose in 1945 and after are just collapsing. Yeah. They are an acute crisis. People are very unhappy. They want more democratic instruments of government, and the failure to get them is what's causing, all kinds of disorder, conflict, catastrophe globally. I mean, humanity is the social progress of recent decades is being rapidly undone.
Yeah, but people don't. It's not like changes are made. It's not like people seem to get more politically inclined. I mean, or is that just an American issue? Am I being too much of an American? Where we've become so anesthetized and we just consider, well, you go vote every 4 years, and then we complain about the politicians that we vote for. Meaning there doesn't seem to be this uprising of sentiment to change any of this stuff. I mean, do people even consider the system as being something that's changeable?
Those are all great questions, and the answers are complex. I mean, Trump is a symbol of change in a sense. I mean, it's a very perverse symbol, but people want change, and people voted for Trump because he represented change in their view. I mean, after all, it was Joe Biden who went to a room full of mega donors in 2019, I believe, and promised that if he was elected, nothing would fundamentally change. Mm-hmm. And people did want change, and they voted for Trump in the belief that he represented change. And he did. Not change of a democratic sort, but it certainly is shaking things up and is causing the political structure to go into acute crisis.
Yeah, I guess he is judicial and other. Yeah, I guess he is. I mean, but this is not the change.
I completely and totally agree. But it is a sign that people are unhappy with the status quo.
They
And
just
I
don't
think
necessarily
that
know how to fix it or alter it in any particular way. There's a level of
exactly.
stick-to-itiveness with the system that just doesn't change. Mm.
Exactly. And that's where and socialists believe they have an answer to that problem.
Can we talk about Georgia for a moment? So the Georgian, I think it's the prime minister, comes out and he spills the beans. He says, hey, NATO wanted us to open up a second front. And if we didn't do it, they were going to effectively use money from NGOs to try to overthrow our government. And we saw it play out, right? You got, what is that lady's name? That French spy that was president at the time. It was effectively using her position to try to push the prime ministership over. And they wanted effectively Georgia to open up a second front against Russia to overexpand Russia. And the Georgia government was like, are you out of your mind? Look at what's happening to Ukraine right now. Why would we want to do that? And it was like, either you do it or else. That's astonishing. That is
Well,
astonishing.
it was crazy given what happened to Georgia in 2008. I mean, and in 2008, the president of Georgia was on the phone several times a week with John McCain, the arch hawk in New York, and McCain was urging him to attack Russia, and they did. And it was a catastrophe because Russian troops and tanks rolled into Georgia and came within a few miles of Tbilisi, the capital. They could have gone into Tbilisi, but they really had no point. There was no reason to do so. But Georgia suffered a stunning rebuff, and what a majority of Georgians clearly want are decent relations with their giant neighbor to the north,
Right.
with whom they do a great deal of trade, have a great deal in common culturally. And there are many Russians in Georgia, many Georgians in Russia. They were formerly all part of the Soviet Union, and therefore their two societies were very heavily, interpenetrated. So so they want good relations, and NATO is trying to spark a broad front against Russia. And Georgia didn't want any part of it, and now it's clear that Poland is very leery of the same issue. Poland doesn't
Yeah.
want to be dragged deeper into a war with Ukraine.
You explain something to me. So I was going to have the foreign minister of Austria, former foreign minister of Austria, come on. She wasn't able to come on. So I will ask you. You follow these just as closely. What is Europe's motivation here? They're being deindustrialized. Money is fleeing out of the country, like from standpoint of the weapons that they're spending the money on, or the oil and gas where they were paying like 5 times more for, or buying third-party oil and gas, which is still just Russian oil anyway, just so they could say, well, this is coming from Saudi Arabia. Where did Saudi Arabia get it from? Russia. Like, and they're continuously doing this. And now you got the goofball Starmer coming out effectively saying, I'm going to feed Brits to the Russian military, when he couldn't even field 20,000 troops if he needed to tomorrow. Like, I don't get the motivation. Do they honestly believe that Russia's a threat? Have they bought into their own propaganda for this nonsense? What is going on? Because this is not necessarily working out to Europe's best end. Russia's moved up to like number 4 in regards to the global economy for the GDP. Germany has been deindustrialized. Europe itself has been taking a hit directly because of not having access to cheap energy. What's the motivation with this?
Well, I mean, the motivation is that, I mean, Western Europe came together in the 1940s under the U.S. aegis.
Right.
I mean, it was the U.S. which really put the continent together. Now, I mean, not that the Europeans were passive by any means, but still, the U.S. leadership is what really enabled the post-war European order to take shape. But that leadership has fallen apart, and it's not only under Trump; it really began under Biden. I mean, certainly the Nord Stream sabotage, which
Yeah.
we both know who did that. was an astonishing blow, and it's a blow that really the powers in Western Europe really can't comprehend. They really have not dealt with that issue. They sort of try to forget about it. They put it out of their mind. They pretend, they come up with ridiculous theories that it was like 5 Ukrainians on a 50-foot yacht, which is ludicrous. And then they drop it and they hope that everyone forgets. And Trump, by the way, on May 5th, a reporter asked him why he doesn't convene an official investigation into Nord Stream, and Trump said essentially, why should I bother? I can ask anybody. I know who to ask, and they'll tell me what happened, and I know what the answer will be.
Right.
Now, I'm not very happy with Trump's answer, because I think a formal investigation would be a good thing, would be very important, would be vital. But it'll open up a huge can of worms, which will wind up discrediting the entire centrist European leadership. The only people in Germany that are raising a fuss about Nord Stream is the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the far right-wing party that is supported by Trump and by J.D. Vance, and they've been sounding the cry over Nord Stream, demanding an investigation. But Olaf Scholz and now Merz, his conservative successor, don't want to hear about it, because they want to line up support for the Ukraine war, and they know that if the truth comes out about Nord Stream, that the case for further intervention in the Ukraine will be greatly weakened, and the sharks will start circling around the Merz coalition government.
But I got to be honest, this is bewildering to me. Like, when you have Joe Biden who gives a speech and he openly says, if Russia goes in, that pipeline is going to effectively stop working. And the reporter is like, sir, that's not your pipeline. How do you plan on doing it? He said, we'll do it.
Yeah.
The Russians go in, pipeline blows up. And people are like, obviously the Russians blew up their own pipeline.
It's like if I say I'm going to kill person X, then person X dies, and then I say, I'm glad someone killed him. It looks really bad. It really looks like I am the perpetrator. But that's not all, though. There's vast circumstantial evidence. The U.S. is the only country with the capability, and blowing up a pipeline at 260 feet below the water is no simple task. You just don't don a snorkel and fins and go down and do it. It takes heavy equipment. It takes special gas tanks. It takes decompressors. It takes a lot of heavy duty stuff. And the idea of doing it aboard a 50-foot yacht is laughable.
Yeah. So Hirsch wrote the article on this.
Yeah, Hirsch's article. It still is the best thing out there. It still is the best piece on the sabotage, and everyone, and all the people in authority just wish it would go away, but it's not going to go away. And the problem is that the leadership of the EU just wants the old U.S. back. But it's not going to. But it's not going to get the old U.S. back. It's got Trump, and it's got a war in the Ukraine, and the latest feat by the Ukrainians is undeniably impressive. This was quite a tour de force. But nonetheless, the basic lineup is the same. I mean, Russia has got a GDP which I think is 14 times greater than the Ukraine's. Its population is, I think, it's 3.5 or 4 times larger. I mean, Russia just can bring to bear far greater resources, and in modern warfare, that's what counts. It's the economic power first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And so I just think there's just no question that how this war will end. Um,
But certainly they have to know. Like, for example, we were doing the video showing Estonia trying to go after a Russian ship. And when a fighter comes in, Estonia backs off because that Estonian boat was about to be lit up. Meaning they are rubbing shoulders very closely over and over and over again. At some point, somebody's going to mess up. And by the way, that attack that took place, whether it's 6 planes that were destroyed, 7 planes or 8 planes, I think Ukraine is saying 12. Other sources are saying, I think CNN said they can verify 4. Let's split the difference and say 8. Agreed that it's a hell of an operation. It took them 18 months to do that operation. You can't replicate that. 18 months. Like it puts me in mind of Thanos in the Avengers, where Iron Man is fighting him, and Iron Man does all of this like impressive stuff. And Thanos is like, you did all that for a drop of blood. It puts you in mind of that, right? It's like you did all of that time. You took all of this time, and the best that you were able to get was this. Whereas Russia's killed like 3,000 people over the course of the last week. It's not matching up. And to add to this, CNN is reporting that Hegseth was watching the attack live as it was taking place. Now, I don't know and understand why these people believe that Donald Trump didn't know about this or that the U.S. wasn't involved in this. I do not know why they think that at all. I've given a list of reasons why the U.S. was involved. But that is getting very dicey. We effectively was working with Ukraine to hit their missile capacity, their atomic deterrence and delivery systems in a war that Russia full well believes and is right that they're fighting ultimately against NATO and may end up in a war with the NATO over the course of in a few years if NATO gets what it wants in order to rebuild its own military fortifications and everything else. That is massively dangerous. Oh, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you disagree with that?
It's completely dangerous. I mean, what this operation does is it ups the ante, and it ups the ante in a way which is ultimately not favorable to the Ukraine. But I mean, I take no sides in this conflict, and I'm willing to concede, the very impressive nature of this operation.
It was.
It shows where warfare is heading. That the drone revolution is only a few years old. It's got a long ways to go, and the implications are really, really scary. I mean, there's talk about like bumblebee-sized drones that are fitted with with facial recognition, programs. And I can release one now, and then fit in your photograph from this show, and that bumblebee will home in on your forehead with 2 or 3 grams of explosives.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's unbelievable. This is the face of warfare.
This is Black Mirror stuff, by the way.
Yeah, it's Black Mirror stuff. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's the face of modern warfare, and these are devastatingly effective. But drones can be fought, and the Russians are developing counter drone and their own techniques and their own drone forces, and they are. And their advances in the Ukraine are picking up. So Ukraine is losing, territory at a stepped up rate. And I think that the writing is on the wall. I just can't see how the Ukraine can prevail in the long run. Yesterday, the New York Times. Was it yesterday? No, on Sunday, the New York Times had an editorial. In which the editorial said that any realistic settlement of the war in the Ukraine will involve territorial concessions by the Ukraine. This is the first time as far as I'm aware, that a New York Times editorial has actually said this.
That's impressive.
But they're absolutely correct. Now, Zelensky will never say yes to that. I think there's actually a line in the Ukrainian constitution which makes it impossible for him to advocate that policy. And in any case, if he did say that, the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi military force that dominates the Ukrainian military, would string him up from a lamppost.
Yep.
So that's the issue. We know what it will take to end the war. But we also know that is impossible. That the Ukraine will never accept such a stance, and as a result, the war will grind on and on for a fairly long time to come until one side or the other collapses. Yeah.
But Europe, and see, this is where I want to bring in Europe also. There is a level of cavalierness with Ukrainian lives that is ghastly.
Yeah.
That I've seen coming out of U.S. politicians where they would say, well, yeah, we're just putting in money they're putting in their lives, so this is a good deal for us. That feels gross when you say it that way, but there's an honesty to it. And the same thing with the Europeans, where they're looking at it as, okay, we need time. It's almost as if they're sacrificing Ukraine, almost like if you had a military campaign and you need to leave 2 people behind that you know are going to die in order to get your entire team out. And Ukraine is that guy for Europe, where they're like, all right, we know we're sacrificing them, but we need you to keep fighting to the last dead Ukrainian while we build up our military industries, while we get our military involved, while we increase our military production. And in 2 or 3 years, hopefully you can keep fighting most of that time. Then we'll be ready to get on the battlefield with the Russians after we've zapped them of a certain amount of strength. That is so grotesque. And, there's a question of, okay, well, why would Ukraine even accept that premise? Well, as you pointed out, the people who are running Ukraine are not on board to hear about this notion of surrender or quit or anything like that. But Europe in this case is thinking of it in the way that America thinks about it. It's just fascinating to me that this is the way this is breaking down. They are doing everything in their power to keep this war going. Everything in their power. Goosing Zelensky's head up. Hey, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you money. We're going to get the U.S. to stay on board and stay in this war and stay plugged in, et cetera, et cetera. And you have Zelensky, who continues to sacrifice his people over and over and over in a hopeless campaign that everybody at this point, with the exception of a few people in Ukraine, knows is hopeless.
Well, there are several things. I mean, first of all, it's not so much they want to keep the war going. It's they don't know how to stop it.
Wait, you mean Europe or Ukraine?
Everyone. Yeah, Europe and Ukraine.
I think Europe wants to keep it going, though. Keep going. Go. Explain your case. I want to hear this.
I mean, it's that a war is a very easy thing to start and a very hard thing to end. Zelensky looked like a hero in those first few weeks after February 2022. In which they fought the Russians back. The Russian offensive was mired. The extreme, gross incompetence was displayed by the Russian military brass, et cetera. Everyone was cheering Zelensky on. Yeah. But the war soon turned into a long slog, and no one knows how to turn it off. And it just keeps on going. And the Europeans are beset by terrible contradictions. They don't know how to turn the war off either, because if Russia wins and if the Ukraine collapses, I'm talking about like a November 1918 scenario, which is what happened with the Germans, where they finally just collapsed.
Yeah.
If that happens, number one, the Ukraine will have to make major territorial and political concessions to Russia. They will have to, give up Donetsk, Luhansk, the Crimea. They will have to demilitarize. They will have to give up any thought of joining NATO. That will become completely impossible. No NATO troops allowed on Ukrainian territory. Yeah. They may be able to join the EU. That's probably open for negotiation, but they're certainly not NATO. They'll have to denazify. Change all those streets named after Stepan Bandera, the World War II collaborator. Give them new names. Stop having children in schools singing hymns to "My mother is the Ukraine, my father is Stepan Bandera." And by the way, the vote in Poland reflected a significant anti-Ukrainian sentiment and anti-Banderite sentiment. People forget that Bandera, his forces probably massacred around 70 to 100,000 Poles in 1943 in the Western Ukraine. It was horrendous. So this is the kind of mass murderer who is the father of the Ukrainian government. It's disgusting. But so they'll have to denazify, they'll have to demilitarize, they'll have to essentially Finlandize. Finland is the country that was sort of, under from 1944 until 1991, it kind of was under broader Soviet
control,
suzerainty, Soviet-imposed neutrality. And I think I mentioned before in a previous show
you did.
that they
were doing like stamps.
They issue a postage stamp on the honor of NATO's birthday, and on the honor of Lenin's birthday, and they also had to be scrupulously neutral in terms of foreign policy. Okay, but that was a golden age for Finland, by the way,
right.
A time of dramatic economic advancement, political advancement, etc. I mean, Finland did a lot better compared, vis-a-vis its giant neighbor than Mexico has vis-a-vis its giant neighbor.
Right.
I mean, the U.S. has, stomped all over Mexico, not to mention Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Finland got an excellent deal, considering that it was part of the Axis, and Finnish troops had taken part in the siege of Leningrad, in which roughly 1 million civilians starved to
death.
So that's the kind of future the Ukraine would face, and I say it's a great deal. Go for it, because you're a small country next to a big one, and it's not fair, but it's not fair being a Mexican either, or being a Canada. And when you live next to a giant, you gotta tread softly. That's the way the world works. And if I were the Ukraine, I would grab that fast. But of course, it's just not possible.
Not the way it works.
No.
Do you think that part of the problem is that they would have to somehow justify the war if they lose? Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, because I kept saying
we just threw away 500,000 lives. Sorry about that.
It's like how do you? I think it was like when I was at the station, I would ask, at some point somebody's going to say, "What was this for?" And they're not going to have a good answer.
Yeah,
they're just not. It's like hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives for what? Like, you lost, so you didn't even get the win out of it. And this goes back to Aristovich. Aristovich has a clip where he's like, "Yeah, we knew in order to be in NATO, we would have to go through the Russians first, meaning we knew that a war was coming up with the Russians because we knew that NATO was always going to be a red line, but we had to basically endure this test of strength in order to be closer to the West." And you hear that clip and you're like, that is disgusting. That is so disgusting. And now he's a dissident, where you have Ukrainians who are cheering, hoping he gets shot in the head by the terrorists who are running the country, or by the lunatics who are running the country. It's amazing, like what that country has endured and gone through. It's a catastrophe. And
it is.
Do you think there's reconciliation for this, by the way? I mean, you have a better historical perspective than I do. Do you see this as, at some point, water under the bridge, or not so much?
Reconciliation is a very difficult process. I mean, there was reconciliation between France, Britain, and Germany after the war. But number one, that was under the U.S. aegis, which is very important, and actually under the U.S. Soviet aegis, which was very important, and also under the general acceptance of a broad anti-fascist ideology, an ideology rife with contradictions, but nonetheless one that everyone could agree on for a period of roughly 40 or 50 years. And there was also very strong economic growth. I mean, the world was transformed between 1948 and 1973, 25 years of dramatic economic growth, which changed everything. The music people listened to, the movies they watched, the clothes they wore, the relations between generations, between men and women, between among the races, et cetera, et cetera. It was a dramatic change. Now, those conditions do not exist now. I mean, there's no anti-fascist ideology like there was in the 1940s. There's no dramatic growth, economic growth lying in the future. Clearly, the capitalist machinery is slowing down, and actually, if they stopped the phony bookkeeping tricks they do, it would actually be in the negative. And the conditions aren't the same. So therefore, I think you'll see that things will fester. Look at relations between Poland and the Ukraine have been festering since 1648. That is nearly 400 years ago. So I suppose we can say, things will fester for maybe the next 400 years. You and I will no longer be around to see that process.
Horrible. That is horrible. We could end it on this, but I remember I was in Poland. I wasn't heavy into politics like talking about. I didn't know how the Poles looked at the Russians. Oh man, you said that there was the candidate that the Poles elected for the VP, the presidential elect. If he is anti-Ukrainian, then he is also anti-Russian. I was shocked at the level of anger in Poland at Russia. When I went to the museum, the Battle of Poland Museum. That's not the name of it, but they talk about
basically the Warsaw Uprising in 1944.
Yeah, that's it. The Warsaw Uprising Museum. Then it made more sense. I mean, they have an entire section of that is a red room, or like a red area where the entire thing is bathed in red, where they talk about the Soviets and what the Soviet Union did to Poland. Basically, Stalin was pissed off at the miracle of the Vistula. And so he was chomping at the bit for decades to get his chance to get back at Poland. And when they finally took Poland, he effectively took his chance. That's the way they look at it. So I get it, but Jesus.
The reality is much more complicated, by the way.
Please.
Much more complicated. Oh, well, first of all, no, I don't. I mean, Stalin massacred the entire leadership of the Polish Communist Party in the purges. Right. So the PCP, the Polish Communist Party that took power from 1944 on, was a shattered shell of its old self. I mean, the leaders had all been through the Stalinist terror. They were still kowtowing to Stalin, but nonetheless, there were two forces. There were the pro-Western forces and the pro-Russian forces, the People's Army and the Home Army or National Army. Right. And the National Army, which was pro-London, was riddled with fascists. It was riddled with anti-Semites. If you were a Jew escaping from a ghetto and you saw in the forest a unit of the Home Army, you ran the other way. Yeah. If you saw a unit of the People's Army, the Soviet-backed People's Army, you ran toward them because they would welcome you as a fellow fighter. It was the exact opposite. In 1948, there were major anti-Jewish pogroms in Kielce, a town in Poland. The PCP leadership was very heavily Jewish, so therefore much of the right-wing opposition, clung to the old theory of Judeo-Bolshevism. That Stalinism was, and Judaism were just two sides of the same coin. And we see it now. I mean, we see that the Polish right is heavily allied with the church, and the church in Poland is very right wing. It has a serious major anti-Semitic fringe, and there's also an anti-Ukrainian ethnic element, and a very heavily anti-Russian element. And by the way, religion also figures into that as well. I mean, these things are never simple, but there's also Catholicism versus Eastern Orthodoxy. It's quite poisonous.
Daniel, that's why you are a fantastic guest. I don't know if my audience knows this. This wasn't prepped in advance. This is him off the top of his head. This is not like, all right, he studied for this just before. It's not.
I could go on, believe me.
Yeah, top of his head. That's fantastic. Thank you for this, man. I always enjoy these conversations. I always learn something in these conversations, and I always get something out of it. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you for this. And just to give the audience, so they know who you are, Daniel Lazare. He is an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, America's Undeclared War. You can find his work at D.H. Lazare on Twitter, or X. Screw that. Pluto is a planet. I'm still calling it Twitter. And you can also find his columns at permanentrevolution.org and Democratic Constitution blog at Substack. And I read your message. Yeah, you should start a Substack on your own too.
I have, by the way. It's just getting off the ground. So everyone subscribe.
Well, what's the name? It's just Daniel Lazare at Substack?
Daniel Lazare at Substack.
Fantastic. Daniel, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You have a good day, okay?
Same to you.
Oh, God, I love my guests. Like, look, I always tell you guys, when I bring somebody on, it's usually because I'm interested in talking to the person. And there's certain people I always learn something from, especially as you just kind of pour into their knowledge. Daniel Lazare is one of those people. He just